My husband sold my late father's vintage Rolex to fund his luxury vacation with his mistress. When I frantically called the pawn shop to get it back, the owner whispered something that made my blood run cold. "Ma'am, you need to see what we found inside the watch mechanism." It was not just a timepiece. It was a ticking time bomb for my husband's entire family. My name is Sienna, and at 34 years old, I never thought my marriage would end over a flight upgrade. I was on my hands and knees clawing through the bottom drawer of the mahogany dresser. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was gone. The faded velvet box was empty. Behind me, I heard the sharp zip of a suitcase. I spun around. Grant stood there checking his reflection in the full-length mirror, adjusting his silk tie with infuriating calmness. His Louis Vuitton carry-on sat by the door, packed for his so-called business trip to Cabo. "Grant, where is it?" I held up the empty box, my voice trembling. "Where is my father's Daytona?" Grant did not even turn around. He sprayed a cloud of expensive cologne, the one I bought him for Christmas. "Oh, that old thing," he said casually. "I got rid of it this morning." The air left my lungs. "You did what?" That was the only thing I had left of him. Grant finally looked at me, but his eyes held no remorse, only annoyance. "Stop being so dramatic, Sienna. It was a scratched-up piece of junk collecting dust. I took it to Gold in Time on 4th Street. They gave me 15 grand for it. Can you believe that? Some idiot actually paid that much for a dead man's trash." I felt sick. My father died wearing that watch. He was a brilliant inventor who died with nothing because people like Grant's family stole his ideas, and now Grant had sold his last memory like it was a used toaster. "Why, Grant? Why would you do that?" he scoffed, picking up his sunglasses. "Because the company card is maxed out again thanks to your mediocre budgeting. I needed the cash to upgrade to first class. I am a director, Sienna. I cannot be seen flying coach like a peasant. It is bad for the brand." The brand. He was talking about a job he only got because of nepotism, while I restored million-dollar paintings to pay the mortgage he could not afford. He sold my heart for extra legroom. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by the person who was supposed to protect you. I stood up, my hands shaking. "That watch was not yours to sell, Grant. It was my inheritance." Grant laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "Inheritance. Your dad was a broke failure, Sienna. The only thing you inherited was his bad luck. Be grateful I got any money for it at all. Now get out of my way. I have a plane to catch." He grabbed his bag and brushed past me, knocking my shoulder. He did not know it yet, but that flight to Cabo would be the most expensive trip of his life. As the front door slammed shut, I did not cry. I wiped my face and reached for my phone. I dialed the pawn shop. I scrambled down the marble staircase, my bare feet slapping against the cold steps. I caught up to him just as he reached the foyer. The front door was wide open, letting in the humid afternoon heat and framing a scene that made my blood boil. A sleek black Mercedes sedan was idling in the circular driveway. Leaning against it were the two people who made my life miserable. Whitney, my husband's older sister, and her husband Damon. Whitney looked pristine in a white blazer and oversized sunglasses, scrolling through her phone with bored detachment. Damon stood tall and imposing in a charcoal suit, his arms crossed over his chest. He was a high-powered corporate attorney who used his intellect like a blunt weapon. "Grant." "Stop!" I yelled, breathless. I reached for the handle of his Louis Vuitton suitcase. "You cannot take that money. We are 3 months behind on the mortgage. If we miss another payment, the bank will foreclose." Grant did not even flinch. Before I could get a grip on the bag, a large hand clamped around my wrist. It was Damon. He did not squeeze hard enough to leave a mark, just enough to show he could overpower me without effort. "Easy there, Sienna," Damon said. His voice was deep and smooth, the kind of voice that commanded boardrooms and silenced opposition. "Let us not make a scene in front of the neighbors. It is unbecoming." I tried to yank my hand back, but his grip was iron. "That money was from my father's watch," I spat. "It is mine." Damon released me with a dismissive flick of his hand, adjusting his cufflinks. Actually, legally speaking, you are incorrect. Since you and Grant do not have a prenuptial agreement, any asset liquidated during the marriage is considered community property. Grant has every right to use those funds as he sees fit. You really should read the statutes before you start screaming like a banshee. It makes you look uneducated. He smiled, a cold, predatory baring of teeth. I stood there rubbing my wrists, seething at his arrogance. He always did this. He used the law to justify Grant's selfishness. Whitney stepped forward, then lowering her sunglasses to look me up and down. Her gaze was like a physical slap. I suddenly became painfully aware of my appearance. I was wearing my work clothes, an oversized linen shirt, stained with turpentine and flecks of oil paint from the restoration project I had been up all night finishing. My hair was tied back in a messy bun, and I had no makeup on. God, look at you. Whitney laughed, a tinkling hollow sound that grated on my nerves. You look like you just crawled out of a dumpster. Honestly, Grant, I do not know how you wake up to that every morning. It is embarrassing. She turned to Grant, brushing an invisible speck of dust off his shoulder. You deserve a break, little brother. Go enjoy yourself. We will handle things here. Grant did not defend me. He never did. He just chuckled, tossing his bag into the trunk. She is an artist, Whit. They are supposed to be messy. He said it like it was a defect, not a profession. He turned to me, his hand on the car door. Look, I will deal with the bills when I get back. Just try not to ruin anything else while I'm gone, okay? He slid into the leather back seat. Damon got into the driver's seat, and Whitney rode shotgun. As the window rolled up, Grant offered one last parting shot, his face devoid of any affection. Oh, and do not wait up for dinner this week. I will probably be too busy networking. The car purred to life and glided down the driveway. I stood alone on the porch, watching them disappear around the bend. They looked like the perfect, successful family, and I was just the stain on their perfect picture. But as the silence settled around me, the despair began to harden into something colder, something sharper. I turned around and walked back into the empty house. The black Mercedes disappeared around the bend, leaving only the smell of exhaust and expensive cologne hanging in the humid air. I stood alone on the porch of the house that technically belonged to us, but felt more like a museum dedicated to my husband's ego. The silence that rushed back in was heavy and suffocating. A year ago, I might have collapsed on the pavers and wept until my throat burned. I might have called my mother to complain or poured a glass of wine to numb the sting of humiliation. But today, I did not cry. My eyes were dry and burning with a cold clarity. My father used to tell me that in restoration, you have to strip away the varnish to see the real damage underneath. Grant had just stripped away the last layer of my patience. I turned on my heel and walked back into the house, locking the heavy oak door behind me. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home felt like a punctuation mark. I went straight to the kitchen. It was a pristine white space designed for a chef, but mostly used for heating up takeout. I walked to the stainless steel trash can and stepped on the pedal. Inside it was a mess of coffee grounds, eggshells, and the remnants of Grant's breakfast. And right on top, sitting on a discarded grapefruit rind, was a ball of yellow paper. I reached in, ignoring the grime on my fingers, and fished it out. I smoothed the crumpled paper on the granite countertop. Gold and Time Pawn Shop. 442 West Main Street. The transaction amount stared up at me. $15,000. The price of my husband's loyalty. The price of my father's legacy. I glanced at the clock on the microwave. It was 5:58. Most shops in that part of town closed at 6. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline as I dialed the number printed on the receipt. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up when a gruff voice answered. "We are closed, lady. Call back Monday." "Wait," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Please do not hang up. My husband was just there." "Grant. He sold you a vintage Rolex Daytona this morning." I heard a heavy sigh on the other end. "Look, lady, all sales are final. If he has seller's remorse, that is his problem. I already processed the paperwork." I gripped the phone tighter. "I do not want the money. I need you to know who that watch belonged to. It was not just a watch. It belonged to the man who founded the technology sector in this city. I am the daughter of the inventor who built the original prototypes for Horizon Tech. There was a long pause on the line. The background noise of keys jingling stopped. The inventor? The man asked, his voice dropping an octave. You mean the man who died 2 years ago? Yes, cool guy. The one they erased from the company history books. Yes, I whispered. That was his watch. The line went dead silent for a terrifying 10 seconds. I thought he had hung up. Then I heard the sound of a deadbolt turning and a sign being flipped in a window. You need to get down here right now, the shop owner said. His tone had shifted completely. It was no longer dismissive. It was urgent, almost fearful. It is a 40-minute drive, I said, confused. Can we do this tomorrow? No, the man insisted. I was about to melt the casing down for scrap gold tonight. But when I put the mechanism under the scope, I saw something. Your husband is a fool, ma'am. He sold it for the weight of the gold. He did not know what he was holding. It is not just a timekeeping device. You need to see what we found inside the casing. It changes everything. The bell above the door chimed with a mournful sound as I stepped into golden time. The shop smelled of old paper and metallic dust, a scent that instantly transported me back to my childhood. Mr. Russo was standing behind the counter, under the glow of a green banker's lamp. He was 70 years old, with skin like crumpled parchment and eyes that had seen too much. He had been my father's only real friend, the one person who visited us when the electricity was cut off. He did not say hello. He simply gestured for me to come behind the counter. The security gate buzzed, and I pushed through. Lying on a black velvet pad was the Rolex Daytona. The stainless steel case gleamed under the light, deceptively ordinary. I am sorry, Mr. Russo. I said, my voice tight. Grant had no right to bring this here. I will pay you back the $15,000. I just need to get my checkbook. Put your money away, Sienna. Mr. Russo said, his voice gruff but shaking slightly. You need to look at this. He picked up a jeweler's loupe and handed it to me. Then, with the precision of a surgeon, he used a case opener to unscrew the back of the watch. I leaned in, expecting to see the standard complex gears of a Swiss movement. I had seen inside this watch 100 times when my father cleaned it, but what I saw now made me gasp. The movement was different. The oscillating weight, the rotor that spins to wind the watch, was not the original steel part. It was heavier, darker. That is solid platinum, Mr. Russo whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the rotor. Your father swapped it out. But that is not the important part. Look closer at the surface of the rotor. Look at the texture. I pressed the loupe to my eye. Magnified 10 times, the smooth metal transformed. It was not smooth at all. The entire surface was covered in microscopic etchings. Thousands of lines so fine they looked like a matte finish to the naked eye. It is binary code, I breathed. It is zeros and ones. Mr. Russo nodded. He reached under the counter and pulled out a strange-looking device. It looked like a modified circuit board, with delicate gold pins. Your father left this with me 5 years ago. He told me to keep it safe and never ask questions. He said one day the watch would find its way back to the reader. I never thought he meant like this. He carefully placed the watch onto the device, aligning the platinum rotor with the gold pins. He typed a command into an old laptop connected to the rig. The screen flickered green, then lines of code began to cascade down the monitor like a waterfall. My heart stopped as the scrolling text froze on a header. The letters were bold and unmistakable. Project Horizon, core source code, property of Arthur Vance. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. Horizon Tech, the company that made Grant's family billionaires. The company they claimed Grant's father built from scratch in a garage. It is all here, Mr. Russo said, staring at the screen in awe. Every algorithm, every patent, the entire foundation of their empire. They did not just steal his ideas, Sienna. They stole his life's work, and they buried him in debt to keep him quiet. I stared at the glowing screen. The pieces of the past 2 years slammed into place. The sudden bankruptcy, my father's depression, The way Grant's father, a man who could barely use a smartphone, suddenly became a tech visionary. And Grant, my husband, had sold the only evidence of their crime for a first-class ticket to Mexico. "Wait," I said, spotting a second folder on the screen labeled Audio Logs. "What is that?" Mr. Russo clicked the file. The speakers crackled and suddenly a voice filled the dusty shop. A voice I had not heard in 2 years, but would know anywhere. It was my father, and he was arguing with someone. "You cannot do this to me, Frank," my father's voice pleaded. "This is my code." Then came a second voice, smoother, younger, arrogant. It was the voice of the man who had just lectured me about community property on my driveway. It was Damon. "Sign the papers." Arthur Damon's voice sneered from the recording. "Or we bury you in lawsuits so deep you will never see the sun again. Take the settlement and disappear." I looked up at Mr. Russo, tears streaming down my face, but they were not tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of pure rage. "Connect the drive," I said, wiping my face. "I need a copy of everything." Mr. Russo smiled a grim, determined smile. "I already started the transfer. But Sienna, be careful. If they know you have this, they will destroy you." I looked at the Rolex ticking away on the velvet pad. "Let them try," I said. "They think they are the only ones who know how to play dirty." Grant wanted to sell this watch for its weight in gold. I am going to make sure it costs him everything he has. I stared at the glowing green text on the monitor and felt the ground beneath me shift. Horizon Tech. The name was plastered on skyscrapers, stadiums, and the luxury cars my in-laws drove. They were hailed as the first family of innovation. Grant's father, Richard, was on the cover of Forbes as the visionary who revolutionized cybersecurity. But the lines of code scrolling before my eyes told a different story. It was not a revolution. It was a robbery. Every unique algorithm, every complex encryption key that formed the backbone of their billion-dollar empire was right here. Written by my father years before Horizon Tech even existed. I traced the screen with a trembling finger, recognizing the specific syntax my father used. He called it his signature, a small quirk in the coding structure that no one else employed. It was undeniable proof that the entire foundation of the Grant family fortune was built on a lie. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was back in the hospice room 2 years ago. The smell of antiseptic and decay filled my nose. My father was wasting away, his brilliant mind clouded by morphine and end-stage cancer. Richard had come to visit. I remembered thinking how kind it was of him. He stood by the bedside holding a stack of legal documents. "Just sign here, Art," Richard had urged, his voice dripping with faux concern. "It is just to protect your unfinished work. We will make sure Sienna is taken care of. I promise." My father, barely lucid, his hand shaking so hard he could hardly hold the pen, had looked up at his friend with blind trust. He signed. He signed away his life's work, his legacy, and my future. He died 3 days later, thinking he had secured a partnership. Instead, he had signed a death warrant for his reputation. They took everything and erased him from history. And the ultimate insult was that I married the son of the man who did it. Grant calling me a gold digger while living off the billions his father stole from mine was a level of cruelty I could not comprehend. "Sienna, look at this. Sienna, look at..." Mr. Russo's voice pulled me back to the present. He pointed to a subdirectory hidden deep within the encrypted partition. It was not code. It was a digital audio file labeled simply, "Boardroom June 12th. Mr. Russo clicked play. Static filled the small shop, followed by the sound of a door closing. Then voices cut through the noise. I froze. One voice was Richard's, but the other voice, sharp, arrogant, and calculating, belonged to a man I had just seen in my driveway. It was Damon. "He is completely out of it," Richard Damon's voice said, younger but unmistakable. "He does not know what he is signing. If he recovers, he could sue us for fraud. The capacity argument would hold up in court." Then Richard's voice, cold and dismissive. "He won't recover. And even if he does, who will believe a broke, dying man over us? We have the signature. The code is ours. And once he is gone, the daughter won't be a problem. She is too soft. The recording ended, leaving a ringing silence in the pawnshop. I looked at the reflection of my own eyes in the dark monitor. They were wrong. I was not soft. Not anymore. I wasn't just holding a watch. I was holding a nuclear weapon. The recording continued to spin, the digital progress bar moving agonizingly slow. I listened as Damon's voice, smoother and younger than the one I heard in my driveway, laid out the plan. It was not just a theft. It was an assassination of character. "Make sure the morphine drip is high," Damon said on the tape. "We need him compliant. Once he signs the transfer of intellectual property, the patent rights revert to Horizon. If he tries to contest it later, we paint him as mentally unstable. A tragic genius who lost his mind." My father's voice mumbled something incoherent in the background, a sound of pain that tore through my heart. Then came the sound of paper rustling, a pen scratching against a page, the sound of my life being stolen. Mr. Russo stopped the playback. The silence in the shop was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I stared at the screen, memorizing the date of the file. It was 2 days before my father died. They did not just let him die, they preyed on him while he was taking his last breaths. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my phone, half expecting a call from the hospital, trapped in the memory of the past. But the screen lit up with a message from the present. It was Grant. Card declined at the lounge. Transfer $2,000 to the joint account. Need to entertain a potential client before the flight. I stared at the words. A potential client. I knew exactly what kind of client he was entertaining. The kind that required champagne and a hotel suite. My thumb hovered over the screen. Every instinct in my body screamed to call him, to scream, to play the recording over the phone and watch his world crumble. I wanted to tell him I knew about the theft, the lies, the fake empire. But rage, I realized, is a clumsy weapon. It is loud and messy. Revenge requires precision. If I confronted him now, he would lawyer up. Damon would bury the evidence. They would destroy the watch and claim the recording was deepfake AI. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to think I was still the naive, submissive wife who kept the house clean and the bills paid. I opened my banking app. My savings account money I had scraped together from restoring seamless canvases was the only thing keeping us afloat. I typed in the amount. $2,000, transfer complete. I opened the text thread. I typed words that tasted like ash in my mouth. Sent. Love you. I hit send. Mr. Russo handed me a small encrypted USB drive containing everything from the watch. I closed my hand around it, the metal cool against my palm. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "Keep the watch in the safe. Do not sell it." I walked out of the pawn shop and into the humid evening. The city lights were flickering on the skyline, dominated by the Horizon Tech Tower in the distance. It looked invincible, a monolith of glass and steel. But I knew the truth now. It was built on sand, and I was the storm that was coming to wash it away. While I was standing on a street corner in the dark, clutching a USB drive that contained the smoking gun of a corporate heist, my husband was 2,000 miles away, soaking up the sun in Cabo San Lucas. He was not meeting with clients. He was lying on a teak lounge chair next to an infinity pool that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. And he was not alone. Lying next to him was Amber, a 22-year-old Instagram model, who spent more time looking at her reflection in her phone screen than she did looking at the view. I knew this because Grant's cloud account was synced to the iPad he left on his nightstand. Every photo he took, every video he recorded, appeared in real time on the screen I held in my lap back home. In the video playing on the screen, Amber pouted, sipping a bright blue cocktail. "Babe, this resort is okay, but the service is kind of slow. I thought you said we were going to stay at the private villas." Grant reached over and squeezed her knee. "Patience, babe. You know the situation. Cash flow is a little tight until Friday, but once that bell rings on Wall Street, everything changes." He took a sip of his drink, his face flushed with alcohol and arrogance. "Horizon Tech is going public in 48 hours. The IPO is oversubscribed. Do you know what that means?" It means the stock options I hold are going to be worth $50 million by the time we finish lunch on Friday. We are not just going to rent a villa. We are going to buy one. Amber's eyes lit up. Really? Can we get one in Malibu? I saw this place on Zillow. It has a glass garage and a private beach. Grant laughed, that dismissive laugh I used to mistake for confidence. Malibu is expensive, but I have a plan. I have a liquidable asset back home that should cover the down payment perfectly. He was talking about our house. The Victorian-era brownstone I had spent 5 years meticulously restoring with my own hands. The house where I scraped every inch of molding and refinished every floorboard while he sat on the couch watching football. But you said your wife lives there, Amber whined, twirling a lock of hair. Won't she be mad if you sell it? Grant waved his hand as if swatting away a fly. Sienna, please. She is clueless. She thinks she is on the deed, but I handled the paperwork with Damon. It is all in my name. I will tell her we need to downsize for tax reasons or some other nonsense. She believes anything I say. She is soft. She will sign whatever I put in front of her and move into a condo while we shop for your beach house. I sat in the dark of my living room staring at the screen. The pixelated image of my husband laughing at my stupidity burned into my retinas. He thought I was soft. He thought I was not on the deed because Damon handled the paperwork. But Grant forgot one thing. I was the one who paid the property taxes every year. I was the one who met with the notary when we refinanced. And I knew exactly whose name was on that title. It was not his. I turned off the iPad. Enjoy your margarita, Grant, because when you come home, that house you want to sell is going to be the fortress where your life ends. 5 days later, the front door swung open and Grant breezed in, bringing the smell of coconut oil and betrayal with him. He was bronzed, glowing with health, and looking every inch the successful executive he pretended to be. I was standing in the hallway, wiping my hands on an apron. I had spent 4 hours preparing a roast beef dinner, the kind his mother used to make, thinking it would play into the role of the dutiful wife I needed to maintain for just a little longer. Grant did not kiss me hello. He did not ask how my week was. He simply dropped his heavy suitcase onto the hardwood floor with a loud thud. Hey, he said, distracted, scrolling through emails on his phone. God, it is humid back here. Cabo was perfect. You really missed out. I forced a smile that felt like it was carved out of marble. I am sure it was lovely. Dinner is on the table. He waved a hand dismissively. I ate on the plane. Just take care of this for me. He kicked the suitcase toward me. My suits are a mess. Get them to the dry cleaners first thing tomorrow, and wash the casual stuff yourself. I do not trust those idiots with my linen shirts. I stared at the bag. I knew exactly what was inside. Clothes that smelled of another woman's perfume. Sand from a beach I was not invited to. But I bent down and picked up the handle. Of course, Grant. I will sort it out tonight. He walked past me into the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge without using a glass. He leaned against the counter, looking at me with critical eyes. Listen, about the IPO launch party this weekend, he started, taking a long swig of water. I have been thinking. It is going to be a very high-pressure environment. Wall Street sharks, international investors, that sort of crowd. I paused, holding his dirty laundry. You mean the party celebrating the company my father founded? Technically the company my father saved, he corrected sharply. Anyway, the point is, it is going to be all business. Boring conversation about market caps and equity splits. You would be miserable. Plus, let us be honest, Sienna, you do not exactly have the wardrobe for a black tie gala. It is better if you just stay home. He waited for me to argue. He wanted me to beg, to cry, to ask why he was ashamed of me. It would give him the satisfaction of rejecting me again. But I did not give him that pleasure. You are right, I said softly, lowering my eyes. I would probably just say something stupid and embarrass you. I will stay here and get a head start on the spring cleaning. Relief washed over his face. Exactly. You get it. You are a homebody, Sienna. That is your strength. I am going to jump in the shower. I feel gross. He tossed his phone onto the kitchen island and headed upstairs, whistling. The moment the bathroom door clicked shut and the shower water turned on, the submissive wife vanished. I dropped the laundry bag and snatched his phone. Grant was arrogant, but he was also lazy. His passcode was still his birthday. I unlocked it, and my fingers flew across the screen. I did not look at the photos of Amber. I did not read the texts mocking me. I went straight to the banking apps and the cloud storage. I plugged in the USB drive I had prepared, connecting it directly to his lightning port. Download started. Upstairs, I heard him singing in the shower, washing away the guilt he did not feel. Down here, I was stealing his digital soul. Every offshore transfer, every hidden gambling debt, every conversation with Damon about hiding assets. The progress bar hit 100% just as the water stopped. I unplugged the drive and slid his phone back exactly where he left it. When he came downstairs, in his towel drying his hair, I was scrubbing a pan humming a tune. "All clean?" I asked, cheerful. "Spotless," he said, smirking. He had no idea how right he was. I was scrubbing him out of my life one bite at a time. The next morning, the atmosphere in my house shifted from domestic quiet to corporate war room. Grant had summoned the Council of Wolves, which meant Whitney and Damon were sitting on my white linen sofa, treating my living room like their personal boardroom. I walked in carrying a silver tray with crystal water glasses, but no one looked up. They were too busy dividing up the spoils of a war they thought they had already won. "We need to move the liquid assets into the Cook Islands Trust by midnight," Damon said, tapping furiously on his tablet. "Once the IPO hits, the SEC is going to be crawling all over our financials. If they see this much cash sitting in domestic accounts, they will tax us into oblivion. Or worse, they will start asking where the initial seed capital came from." Grant laughed, leaning back with his feet on the coffee table. "Let them ask. We have the paper trail covering the last 5 years. Everything before that is ancient history." Whitney spotted me standing there and her face twisted into a sneer. "Finally. I have been dying of thirst. Make me a macchiato sienna, and do not burn the milk this time like you did at Christmas. You really are useless at everything, or not you." I placed the water down gently, resisting the urge to pour the pitcher over her professionally blown-out hair. "Of course, Whitney. I will get that right away." I turned to leave, but I paused by the side table where a large arrangement of hydrangeas sat. I fussed with a wilting leaf, adjusting the vase just slightly. Hidden deep within the dense cluster of blue flowers was a high-fidelity digital recorder I had planted 20 minutes ago. As I walked to the kitchen, the conversation behind me turned to the one subject that could destroy them. "Are we sure about the intellectual property rights?" Damon asked, his voice dropping slightly. The audit team asked about the original source code again. They found some irregularities in the timestamp of the patent filing. Grant scoffed. "You are paranoid. My old man handled that years ago." "It is not paranoia. It is due diligence," Damon snapped. "We scrubbed the servers right after Arthur died. I personally shredded the original hard drives. There is no evidence left that the code did not originate with us. The old man is dead, and his daughter is in the kitchen making coffee. The secret died with him." I stood by the espresso machine, my hand gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. I could hear the hiss of the steam wand masking the sound of my ragged breathing. They admitted it. They admitted to scrubbing the servers. They admitted to shredding the drives. And now, thanks to the device in the flower vase, I had them admitting it on tape. I poured the milk, watching the white foam swirl into the black coffee. It looked like a storm cloud. I walked back into the living room, pasting a vacuous smile on my face. "Here is your coffee, Whitney," I said, setting the cup down. She took a sip and grimaced. "Too sweet." "God, can you do anything right?" I apologized meekly, lowering my head. "I am sorry. I will try harder next time." I would not need to try harder next time, because next time there would not be a next time. I walked away, leaving them to their conspiracy, unaware that the useless wife had just caught the wolves in her trap. Grant slid a thick document across the polished mahogany coffee table. It landed next to the vase of hydrangeas that was currently recording every word of their conspiracy. He tapped the paper with his index finger, his face arranging itself into a mask of concern that did not quite reach his eyes. Babe, with the IPO coming up the market, is going to be volatile. I need to make sure our assets are shielded from any sudden downturns. This is just a standard property management agreement. It gives me the authority to move things around quickly if the economy takes a dive. Sign it so I can protect our future. I picked up the document. The header read, General Power of Attorney with full disposition rights. I scanned the dense legal text knowing exactly what I was looking for. Clause 4 stood out immediately. It granted the agent full authority to liquidate real estate assets without further consent from the principal. He was not protecting the house. He was preparing to sell it to buy his mistress a villa in Malibu. I looked up at him, widening my eyes in feigned confusion. Grant does liquidate mean sell. Why does it say you can sell the house without asking me? I thought we were going to live here forever. I spent 3 years restoring these floorboards by hand. Grant let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his hair. Jesus, Sienna, why do you always have to make everything so difficult? It is just legal boilerplate. It is standard language. I am not going to sell the house. It just gives me the option to leverage the equity if I need to buy stock options quickly. Do you want me to miss out on making us millions because you are attached to some old wood floors? But I do not understand. I persisted, playing the part of the dim-witted wife perfectly. If it is just for stock, why do you need full power over the deed? Maybe I should have a lawyer look at it. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Damon stood up from the sofa. He walked over to me, his tall frame casting a shadow over the chair I was sitting in. He adjusted his silk tie and looked down at me with the pitying expression one might give to a slow child. Sienna, listen to me very carefully. Damon said, his voice low and threatening. This involves complex fiduciary structures that are frankly beyond your comprehension. We are dealing with high-frequency trading algorithms and liquidity ratios. If you delay this process, you are exposing Grant to significant liability. Do you want to be the reason your husband is investigated for negligence? Do you want to ruin this family because you are too stubborn to sign a piece of paper? Whitney chimed in from the corner, examining her manicure. Just sign it, Sienna. God, stop being such a burden. Grant is doing everything for you, and you still complain. I looked from Damon's intimidating glare to Grant's impatient scowl. I let my lower lip tremble slightly. I shrank back into the chair, making myself look small. I do not want to be a burden. I whispered, my voice shaking. I just want to help. Then help by signing the damn paper, Grant snapped, uncapping a fountain pen and shoving it into my hand. I took the pen. I hesitated, the nib hovering over the signature line. Okay, Grant, I will sign it. I trust you. I looked up at Damon, batting my eyelashes. But since you are such a good lawyer, Damon, can we add just one tiny thing? Just a little sentence at the end so I feel safe. Like a safety blanket. Grant rolled his eyes, throwing his hands up. Fine. Whatever. If it shuts you up. What is it? I smiled internally. The trap was set. Now I just had to make them step into it. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a crisp stack of papers. It was 20 pages long, single-spaced, and drafted by the fiercest forensic accountant in the city, whom I had paid in advance with the last of my savings. I placed it on top of Grant's power of attorney document. What is this? Grant asked, recoiling like I had placed a dead rat on the table. I kept my voice small and trembling. It is just a standard post-nuptial safety rider. My friend who went through a messy divorce sent it to me. It just says that if we ever split up, I get to keep my car and, have enough for groceries. Since you are getting full power over the house, I thought it was fair. Just a safety blanket, like I said. Damon snatched the document from the table. Let me see that. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning rapidly. He was looking for big numbers. He was looking for lump sum demands or percentages of his precious IPO. He was not looking for a definition clause buried on page 14, section B. Clause 14B was a masterpiece of legal camouflage. It redefined marital assets to include any corporate entity whose foundational intellectual property provenance could be traced to a direct relative of the spouse. It was a mouthful of boring legal jargon that looked like nonsense unless you knew that Horizon Tech was stolen from my father. If the company was built on my father's code, this clause automatically transferred Grant's equity to me as restitution. Damon stopped reading at page 5. He did not even make it to the definitions section. He chuckled, tossing the packet back to Grant with a dismissive wave. "It is harmless," Grant Damon said, leaning back. "Just standard lifestyle maintenance clauses. She wants to ensure she stays in the lifestyle to which she is accustomed. Basically, she wants to make sure she can still buy her paints and groceries if you dump her. It limits your alimony exposure, actually. Sign it. It is worth it to get the house deed." Grant looked at me with pure disdain. "You are unbelievable, Sienna. Always nickel and diming me. You really think I would leave you on the street?" I looked down at my hands. "I just want to be sure, Grant. Please." He groaned and uncapped his Mont Blanc pen. "Fine. If this gets you to sign the property transfer, I will sign your little insurance policy." He pressed the nib to the paper. The ink flowed dark and permanent. He signed his name right below the clause that would strip him of everything he owned. He signed it with a flourish, arrogant and impatient. He shoved the papers at me. "There. Are you happy now? Now sign the house over." I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed the power of attorney giving him the house. It was a fair trade. He got a house with a massive mortgage. I got the legal right to seize $1 billion company. The trap was not just set. The door had just slammed shut behind them. The boutique smelled of lavender and exclusion. It was the kind of place where the price tags were hidden, because if you had to ask, you could not afford it. I needed armor for the war I was about to start, and in high society, armor looks like crimson silk. I ran my hand along a rack of evening gowns until my fingers stopped on a dress that looked like spilled wine and danger. It was structured, sharp, and absolutely terrifying. It was perfect. "Well, if it is not the little match girl." The voice dripped with venom. I froze my hand, still clutching the red silk. I slowly turned around. Standing near the velvet curtain of the fitting rooms was Whitney holding a glass of complimentary champagne. And standing next to her, modeling a shimmering silver cocktail dress, was a young woman with blonde extensions and a vacuous smile. Amber, Grant's mistress. Seeing them together was a physical blow. The sister who despised me, and the woman sleeping with my husband, shopping together like best friends. It was a level of betrayal that transcended simple cheating. It was a conspiracy. Whitney walked over her heels, clicking on the marble floor. She looked me up and down with a sneer. "What are you doing here, Sienna? Are you lost? The discount outlet is 3 blocks down. You are going to stain the merchandise just by looking at it." Amber giggled, looking at me with amused eyes. She clearly had no idea who I was. Grant must have kept my identity a complete secret from her, or described me as such a frump she did not recognize the woman standing in front of her. "Who is this?" Whitney Amber asked, twirling a lock of hair around her finger. "Is she your maid?" Whitney laughed, a harsh barking sound. "I wish. Good help is hard to find." "No, this is just my brother's charity case. She likes to play pretend sometimes." "Put the dress back, Sienna. That price tag has more zeros than your bank account. You will just embarrass yourself when the card declines." Amber covered her mouth, laughing. "Oh my God, totally. You should listen to her. That color is way too bold for someone like you. You need something that says, 'I am invisible.' Try the beige rack in the back. Maybe they have something on clearance." My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the silver dress off Amber's back and tell her exactly whose money was paying for it. I wanted to tell her that the diamond earrings she was wearing were bought with funds stolen from my father. But I forced the rage down, compressing it into a cold, hard diamond in my chest. I looked at the red dress. Then I looked at the sales associate who was watching the scene with a bored expression. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and loud enough for the whole store to hear, "I will take it. And I will take the diamond clutch in the display case too, the one with the platinum clasp." Whitney scoffed, rolling her eyes. "With what money? Did you rob a piggy bank?" I walked to the counter, pulling out my phone. I had cloned Grant's digital wallet when I downloaded his data 5 days ago. I had his black card loaded and ready. I held the phone over the payment terminal. Apple Pay. Horizon Tech corporate account. The machine beeped. A beautiful melodious sound. Approved. I smiled at the salesgirl. Wrap it up. I have a gala to attend. I turned back to Whitney and Amber. Their mouths were hanging open. Whitney looked confused, trying to process how I had access to a corporate black card. Amber just looked jealous. See you around, ladies, I said, grabbing the heavy shopping bag. And Amber, that silver dress makes you look cheap. I would take it off before someone mistakes you for the help. I walked out into the sunlight, leaving them stunned in the middle of the store. The dress was heavy in my hand, but my step was light. I had the weapon. Now I had the uniform. The execution was scheduled for tomorrow night. The front door slammed with such violence that the crystal chandelier in the foyer rattled. I was in the living room carefully tucking the box containing the red dress under the sofa when Grant stormed in. He looked like a man possessed. His face was a mottled purple and veins bulged in his neck. In his hand he gripped the dashcam from my SUV like it was a grenade. He did not speak. He simply hurled the device across the room. It smashed against the fireplace mantel, shattering into plastic shrapnel. "You paranoid psycho!" he screamed, marching toward me. "You think you are clever spying on me. You think I would not notice the recording light blinking while I was driving." I stood up, backing away. "Grant, I do not know what you are talking about. That camera is for insurance. It turns on automatically." "Do not lie to me," he roared, sweeping a collection of porcelain figurines off the side table. They crashed to the floor, exploding into dust. I checked the footage. It recorded everything. Me picking up Amber. Our conversation. Everything. "You planted that there to trap me, didn't you?" He closed the distance between us. The smell of alcohol and another woman's perfume oozed from his pores. He grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging in painful and bruising. "Well, congratulations, Sienna. You got your proof." "Yes, I am seeing someone else. Someone who is young and fun and does not smell like turpentine. And guess what? I do not care that you know. In fact, I am glad. Because now I can stop pretending to tolerate you." He shoved me backward. I stumbled, my heel catching on the rug, and I fell hard onto the floor. My elbow cracked against the hardwood, sending a jolt of pain up my arm. I looked up at him from the ground. He towered over me, straightening his suit jacket, his chest heaving. "I am done," Grant spat. "I called Damon on the way here. He is drafting the divorce papers tonight. As soon as the IPO closes on Friday, I am serving you. You will get nothing. I will make sure you are left with exactly what you brought into this marriage. Zero." He waited for me to beg. He waited for the tears, the hysteria, the pleas to save our marriage. He wanted me to grab his leg and promise to be a better wife. Instead, I slowly pushed myself up into a sitting position. I rubbed my throbbing elbow. My face remained completely blank, devoid of any emotion. Inside, I was not broken. I was calculating. If he filed for divorce before the gala, the optics would be bad. Investors hate instability. I needed him to think he was still in control for just 24 more hours. I looked him dead in the eye. "Okay, Grant," I said, my voice flat and calm. He blinked, confused by my lack of resistance. "What?" "I said okay," I repeated. "If you want a divorce, I will sign whatever you want. I am tired too, Grant. I am tired of trying to be enough for you." I stood up, smoothing my skirt. "But you know as well as I do that a divorce announcement right before the biggest IPO in the company's history is financial suicide. The investors want to see a stable family man, not a scandalous divorcee." I walked over to the shattered remains of the figurines. "So here is the deal. We go to the gala tomorrow night. We smile, we hold hands, we play the happy couple one last time for the cameras. And on Monday morning, you can file the papers. I won't contest them." Grant studied me, his eyes narrowing. He looked for a trap, but saw only defeat. He let out an arrogant laugh. "Fine," he sneered. "One last performance. But do not think this saves you. Monday morning, you are out on the street." He turned and walked up the stairs, leaving me standing in the wreckage of his rage. I watched him go. He thought he had won. He had no idea that Monday morning he would not be filing for divorce. He would be fighting for his freedom. The office of Elias Thorne was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the financial district. Elias was a man whose reputation was as sharp as the creases in his bespoke suit. He was the only corporate litigator in the city who terrified Damon. And right now, he was the only person who could help me execute an empire. I sat at the head of the conference table. To my left was Mr. Russo looking out of place in his tweed jacket, but clutching the velvet box containing the Rolex like it was a holy relic. To my right, Elias flipped through the 20-page document Grant had signed the night before. The room was silent except for the sound of paper turning. Elias stopped at page 14. He read clause 14. B once, then he read it again. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "You got Damon to sign this?" Elias asked, his voice deep and amused. He actually let Grant put his signature on a document redefining marital assets based on intellectual property provenance. He did not read it, I said calmly. He was too busy lecturing me about being simple-minded. He thought he was tricking me into selling the house, so he did not look for the trap I set for the company. Elias laughed, a rich sound that bounced off the glass walls. Arrogance is a hell of a drug. Damon always did think he was the smartest person in the room. This document is a death sentence for his career. By signing this, Grant legally agreed that if the core technology of Horizon Tech can be proven to come from your family, the entire marital equity in the company reverts to you. Mr. Russo stepped forward. And we have the proof. He plugged the encrypted drive from the Rolex into the central server. The monitors on the wall flickered to life. The binary code cascaded down the screens, followed by the undeniable digital signature of my father. Then came the audio file. Damon's voice filled the room, clear and damning, admitting to the theft, admitting to the fraud, admitting to the conspiracy to let my father die. Elias listened, his expression hardening into stone. He looked at the scrolling code, then at the document, then at me. "Sienna," he said, leaning forward, his eyes intense. "Do you realize what you have here? This is not just a divorce settlement. This is not just a lawsuit for damages. This is a hostile takeover. With this evidence and this contract, you do not just get a payout. You get the controlling interest. You get the board seats. You get the building." I looked at the hologram of the Horizon Tech logo rotating on the screen. The company that had erased my father. The company that paid for Amber's dresses and Grant's first-class tickets. "I do not want to pay out, Elias," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I want to burn their version of history to the ground. I want to walk into that gala tomorrow night and take back every single thing they stole." Elias closed the folder with a satisfying snap. He looked at his watch. "The gala starts in 24 hours. That gives us exactly enough time to file the emergency injunctions and prepare the presentation. I will have the federal marshals on standby." Mr. Russo patted my hand. "Your father would be proud, Sienna." I stood up, walking to the window to look at the city below. Somewhere out there, Grant was getting a manicure, preparing to be the star of the show. He had no idea that the curtain was about to fall. "Get the paperwork ready, Elias," I said. "We have a party to crash." The air in the executive suite on the 50th floor was thinner than down on the street. It smelled of aged leather and 30-year-old single malt scotch. Grant stood by the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at the city like a god surveying his ant farm. He raised his crystal tumbler, catching the sunset light. "To the IPO," Grant said, his voice thick with satisfaction. "To the moment we stop being merely rich and start being wealthy." Damon sat behind the massive glass desk, swirled his drink lazily. He looked comfortable in the seat of power, his suit jacket draped over the chair. "Do not sell yourself short, Grant. Once the opening bell rings tomorrow morning, we are not just wealthy. We are a dynasty. The projections just came in from Tokyo. We are looking at a market cap that rivals the biggest players in Silicon Valley." Grant laughed, taking a long sip. "God, if only old man Arthur could see us now. He spent 20 years tinkering in a damp basement trying to perfect that compression algorithm. We took it, packaged it, and made it worth 10 figures in 5 years. Arthur was brilliant," Damon conceded, leaning back and putting his feet up on the desk. "But he was weak. He cared more about the integrity of the code than the profitability of the patent. That was his fatal flaw. Intelligence without ruthlessness is just a hobby. He died broke because he did not have the stomach to do what was necessary. And his daughter is exactly the same, Grant added, shaking his head with a smirk. You should have seen her face last night, Damon, asking for that little safety rider in the contract. She was so terrified I would leave her with nothing. She actually thinks she won a victory by securing her grocery money in case we divorce. Damon chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. Let her have her crumbs. It keeps her docile. We got the house deed, we got the clean audit, and tomorrow we get the world. She is useful for laundry and keeping appearances, but let us be honest, she has her father's spine, which is to say she has none. Grant turned back to the window. To Arthur Vance he said mockingly, raising his glass to the empty air, "Thanks for the code, old man. Sorry you were too stupid to monetize it." Suddenly the massive monitor on the wall behind Damon blinked. A sharp electronic chirp cut through the quiet luxury of the office. A red dialog box popped up in the corner of the server dashboard. System alert. External IP query. Unauthorized access detect. Grant frowned, lowering his drink. What is that? Is the system down? Damon glanced at it over his shoulder, barely turning his head. He waved a hand dismissively, turning back to his scotch. Relax. Just a firewall ping. Probably some kid in a basement trying to brute force the employee portal, or a glitch in the pre-market update. The automated security team handles thousands of them a day. Ignore it. He took another sip. Nothing can stop us now, Grant. We are untouchable. They drank deep, oblivious to the fact that the ping was not a kid in a basement. It was the ghost of Arthur Vance coming to collect his debt. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a sea of black ties and sequins, a shimmering testament to excess. Outside, the paparazzi lined the velvet ropes, screaming Grant's name as if he were a rock star. He stepped out of the limousine with Whitney on his arm. She was wearing a gold gown that cost more than my car, basking in the camera flashes like a lizard in the sun. Grant waved, his smile practiced and blindingly white, but his eyes were darting around the crowd, scanning for threats. He had told me to stay home. He had told me I would be embarrassed. He wanted the night to be perfect, a coronation for the new king of tech. But as they moved through the crush of bodies towards the entrance, he spotted a complication. Amber was standing near the champagne tower, wearing the silver dress she had bought the day before. She raised her glass to him, a subtle gesture that sent a jolt of panic through his chest. She was not supposed to be here. Grant steered Whitney toward the VIP section, his grip on her arm tight. Ignore her, he hissed under his breath. Ignore who? Whitney asked, scanning the room. Is a competitor here? Just keep walking, Grant said, pulling out his phone. He needed a moment of control. He needed to look at his smart home app and see his wife sitting on the couch in her pajamas, miserable and contained. It was his anchor. The proof that while the world was chaotic, his home life was under his thumb. He opened the app. The feed from the living room camera loaded. Empty. He switched to the kitchen camera. The lights were off. Empty. He checked the bedroom. The bed was made. Empty. His heart skipped a beat. He frowned, tapping the screen as if he could force me to appear pixel by pixel. Where are you? He muttered. Everything okay? Whitney asked, pausing to wave at a senator. Grant did not answer. He dialed my number. The phone pressed to his ear. He watched the crowd, his confidence beginning to fray at the edges. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. Hey, this is Sienna. Leave a message. He hung up, his thumb hovering over the screen. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at his skin. I was supposed to be the obedient wife. I was supposed to be waiting for him to come home and tell me how great he was. My absence was a variable he had not calculated. Maybe she went to the store, Whitney suggested, dismissing his worry. Stop obsessing over her. Tonight is about us. Look, there is the chairman of the board. Go shake his hand. Grant nodded, pocketing his phone. You are right. She is probably crying in the bath. She would not dare come here. He adjusted his bow tie and stepped into the ballroom, forcing the smile back onto his face. But the knot in his stomach was tightening. He felt like a captain who just realized the lifeboats were missing, but the band was still playing. While Grant was hyperventilating near the shrimp cocktail, a sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb, gliding past the line of rideshares like a shark through water. The driver opened the rear door, and for a moment the paparazzi stopped shouting Grant's name to see who had arrived. I stepped out onto the red carpet. The crimson silk dress flowed around me like liquid fire. It was bold, dangerous, and completely inappropriate for the submissive wife Grant thought he had left at home. On my wrist, polished to a mirror shine, sat my father's Rolex Daytona. It was no longer a piece of junk. It was the crown jewel of the evening. I walked toward the entrance, my chin held high. Two massive security guards with earpieces stepped in front of the velvet rope, blocking my path. "Name, please." The head guard grunted, scanning his clipboard. "This is a private event." "Sienna Vance," I said, using my maiden name. He ran his finger down the list. "I do not see a Vance here, ma'am. Unless you are a +1, you are going to have to step aside." I did not move. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a heavy cream-colored envelope embossed with gold leaf. I had printed it myself using the template I found in the encrypted files. It was an invitation reserved for founding partners, a tier of guests that technically did not exist in Grant's version of the company history, but was hard-coded into the event's security database. "Scan this," I said, holding out the QR code. The guard looked skeptical, but he aimed his scanner. The machine beeped a distinct, authoritative double tone that I had not heard anyone else's ticket make. The small screen on his device flashed green. "Access Level Alpha. Founding Shareholder." The guard's eyes widened. He looked from the scanner to me and back again. He fumbled with the velvet rope, unhooking it with a newfound respect. "I apologize, Ms. Vance. Right this way. The VIP box is reserved for you." I walked past him, the heels of my shoes clicking rhythmically on the marble. The heavy double doors to the grand ballroom swung open. The noise of the party, a low roar of chatter and clinking glasses, washed over me. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the sea of black tuxedos and polite society. I was a drop of blood in a glass of milk. The room seemed to sense a predator had entered. Heads began to turn. Conversations trailed off. And then I saw her. Whitney was standing near the center of the room, laughing at something a senator said. She glanced up, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Her eyes locked onto mine. The glass of champagne in her hand tilted dangerously. Her smile froze and then shattered. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. And in a way she was. The ghost of the girl she used to bully was gone. The woman standing on the stairs was someone she had never met before. Whitney marched across the ballroom floor, her gold gown rustling like dry leaves. Her face was a mask of fury that she was struggling to keep hidden behind a veneer of social grace. She intercepted me just as I reached the bottom of the grand staircase, blocking my path with her body. Up close, I could see the veins pulsing in her neck. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" she hissed through clenched teeth. Her voice was low, but it vibrated with rage. "Get out! Get out right now before I have security drag you out. You are making a spectacle of yourself." I looked at her calmly, smoothing the silk of my red dress. "I am not going anywhere, Whitney. I am a founding partner. I have every right to be here. In fact, more right than you do, considering you are just the sister of the CEO. Her eyes widened. "You are delusional. You are nothing but a gold digger who got lucky. Look at you wearing a dress you probably stole. You are trash, Sienna. And trash belongs in the alley, not at a black tie gala." She raised her hand. In it she held a full flute of champagne. I saw the intent in her eyes before her muscle even twitched. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to stain the red silk, to make me look like a mess, to drive me out of the room in shame. As she thrust her arm forward to throw the drink, I did not flinch. I simply took one graceful step to the left. It was a movement I had practiced 1,000 times in the studio, dodging falling debris or swinging easels. The golden liquid arc sailed past my shoulder. It did not hit the floor. Instead, it splashed directly onto the person standing right behind me. A high-pitched shriek pierced the ambient chatter of the room. Amber gasped, dropping her clutch. The champagne soaked into the front of her silver dress, turning the metallic fabric into a dark, sticky mess. She looked down in horror as the liquid dripped onto her shoes. "Oh my God," she screamed. "My dress! You ruined my dress!" The sound of the scream acted like a dinner bell for the press. Heads turned. Camera lenses that had been focused on the stage swung around to capture the drama. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning. They captured the image of the CEO's sister holding an empty glass, the CEO's mistress soaked in alcohol, and the CEO's wife standing untouched and regal in the center of the chaos. Grant saw the cameras. He saw the disaster unfolding. He knew that one wrong move now would send the stock price tumbling before the market even opened. He did the only thing a narcissist could do. He entered the scene. He rushed over his face, contorted into a beaming, loving smile that looked painful to maintain. He stepped between Whitney and me, wrapping a possessive arm around my waist. His fingers dug into my ribs hard enough to bruise. "There you are, darling," he announced, his voice booming for the reporters to hear. "I was worried you got stuck in traffic." He pulled me close, kissing my cheek. As his lips brushed my ear, his voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "Smile or I will break your arm. Go along with this, and maybe I will let you keep the dress when I kick you out tomorrow." I smiled back, a dazzling smile that matched his fake energy. I turned to the cameras, resting my hand on his chest, right over his thumping heart. "I would not miss it for the world, honey," I said loud and clear. "Tonight is going to be unforgettable." Grant tightened his grip, steering me away from the sobbing Amber and the fuming Whitney. He thought he was saving the night. He thought he was guiding me to a quiet corner to scold me. He had no idea he was walking me straight to the stage. The spotlight hit Grant, turning his tuxedo into a beacon of success against the dark velvet curtains. He gripped the podium like a captain steering a ship, his knuckles white, not from nerves, but from the intensity of his performance. The crowd was silent, mesmerized by the myth he was spinning. I stood just off to the side in the wings, where he had positioned me to look like the adoring wife. But I was not adoring. I was the executioner waiting for the signal to drop the blade. Horizon Tech did not start in a shiny boardroom. Grant bellowed, his voice rich with practiced emotion. It started in a cold garage with a single laptop and a dream. I remember my father Richard working 4 days straight without sleep, fueled only by black coffee and sheer willpower. He wrote the compression algorithm that changed the world line by line. He sacrificed his health, his time, and his sanity because he believed in a future where data was free. Lies. All lies. Richard Grant could barely program a microwave, let alone a complex neural network. My father Arthur was the one who drank that coffee. My father was the one who slept on a cot in that garage while Richard was out playing golf with investors. My father was the one whose hands cramped so badly he could not hold a fork. Grant was painting a portrait of a martyr using my father's blood as the paint. I took a slow sip of my champagne. The bubbles tasted sharp against my tongue. I watched the audience nodding along, eating up the fabrication. I saw Whitney in the front row dabbing her eyes with a napkin, moved by the fiction of her own importance. I saw Damon looking smug, checking his watch, probably calculating how soon he could leave. They wanted to believe in the lone genius. They had no idea they were cheering for a thief. Grant continued, his eyes glistening with fake tears. He did it for family. He did it so we could have a legacy. And tonight, as we prepare to ring that bell on Wall Street, we honor the man who built this empire from nothing. To my father, Richard, the architect of the future. The room erupted in applause. Grant raised his glass, basking in the adoration. He looked so happy, so secure in his stolen kingdom. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the past was buried in a pauper's grave along with my father. "That is enough," I whispered to myself. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. The screen was already glowing with the remote interface Mr. Russo had set up. It was connected directly to the venue's main projection system via the exploit we found in the stolen code. A big red button pulsed on the screen. It was labeled Override. My thumb hovered over the glass. Time seemed to slow down. I looked at Grant one last time. I remembered every insult, every time he made me feel small, every time he told me I was lucky to be loved by him. To the man you stole it from, I said silently. I pressed the button. Grant raised his hand toward the giant LED screen behind him, which was currently displaying a sanitized timeline of the company's history. And at the center of it all is truth. My father built this company on the pillar of absolute integrity. He never cut corners. He never took credit for work he did not do. That is the legacy we honor tonight. The legacy of an honest man. As the word honest left his lips, the massive screen flickered. A sharp distortion noise screeched through the speakers, causing the front row to cover their ears. Grant froze, his smile faltering. He tapped the microphone. Is the sound working? Then the screen went pitch black. The polite applause died down, replaced by confused murmurs. Grant laughed nervously. It seems we have a slight technical glitch. If the AV team could just... Suddenly, the screen exploded into light. But it was not the slick corporate blue of Horizon Tech. It was grainy, shaky handheld footage. A timestamp in the corner read, October 14th, 1990. White text overlaid the black and white noise. The real Horizon. A face appeared on the screen. It was young, tired, and wearing thick glasses. He was sitting in a cluttered basement surrounded by servers that looked like ancient relics. It was my father, Arthur Vance. The room went deadly silent. On the screen, my father spoke to the camera, holding up a notebook. This is log entry 45. I finally did it. The compression algorithm is stable. I am calling it the Horizon Protocol. Richard does not understand how it works yet. He just wants to know if it will sell, but I told him this code is not for sale. It is the future. Grant turned around slowly, his face draining of all color. He looked like a man watching his own execution. The image of the man he had just called a failure was now towering over him, proving him a liar from beyond the grave. Damon leaped from his seat at the VIP table. He grabbed his headset, screaming into the microphone, his composure completely gone. Cut it. Cut the feed right now. Kill the power if you have to. What are you idiots doing? But the video did not stop. It cut to another clip. My father looked sicker, now thinner. Richard is pressuring me to sign the patent over to him. He says investors need a single name, but I know what he is doing. If I sign this, I lose everything. The crowd gasped. A collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the ballroom. Whispers turned into shouts. Reporters were no longer taking photos of Grant. They were filming the screen. Grant looked out at the audience, his hands shaking. This is a deepfake. This is AI generated. Do not believe it. It is a sabotage. But nobody was looking at him anymore. They were watching the truth unfold in grainy resolution. And standing in the shadows, I watched Grant's empire begin to crumble. I stepped out of the shadows and onto the illuminated stage. The crimson silk of my dress caught the stage lights, making me look like a flame amidst the wreckage of Grant's reputation. The room was paralyzed. Hundreds of eyes shifted from the black screen to me. Grant stood frozen at the podium, his face a mask of sheer terror. He looked at me, and for the first time he did not see a wife he could bully. He saw his end. He lunged toward me, his hand outstretched, reaching for the microphone in my hand. You crazy witch? He hissed, his voice cracking. Give me that. Security, get her off the stage. But before his fingers could graze the metal, a large hand intercepted his wrist. Elias Thorne stepped out from behind me. He was immovable, a wall of legal authority in a charcoal suit. He did not just stop Grant. He shoved a thick envelope against Grant's chest. Touch her and you go to jail tonight instead of tomorrow. Elias said, his voice low but amplified by the nearby mic. This is an emergency federal injunction halting this. IPO immediately. Sit down, Grant. Grant stumbled back, clutching the papers. He looked at Damon in the front row for help, but Damon was already on his phone, frantically trying to move assets that were likely already frozen. I raised the microphone to my lips. My hand was steady. I looked out at the sea of faces, the investors, the bankers, the press. I am sorry to interrupt your evening, I said, my voice ringing clear through the ballroom. But I could not let you buy into a lie. What you just saw on that screen was not a deepfake. It was the truth that has been buried for 2 years. I pointed to the screen where the binary code was now scrolling again. You are not investing in innovation. You are investing in stolen property. The code that powers Horizon Tech was not written by Richard Grant. It was written by my father, Arthur Vance, and I can prove it. I paused, letting the weight of the accusations settle. The scrolling text you see behind me is not just random numbers. It is the original source code, and it is timestamped and encrypted in the blockchain dating back to 2011. That is 3 years before Richard Grant filed his fraudulent patent. That is 3 years before this company even existed. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Blockchain evidence was irrefutable. It was a digital fingerprint that could not be forged or altered. Grant turned to the audience, sweat dripping down his forehead. "She is lying," he screamed, desperation clawing at his throat. "She is just a bitter ex-wife. She does not understand technology." I turned to look at him, cold and pitying. "I understand enough, Grant. I understand that you built a castle on a sinkhole. And I just pulled the plug." Damon shoved Grant aside, nearly knocking him off the podium. He grabbed the microphone, his composure cracking, but his arrogance still intact. He was a lawyer who had built a career on bullying people into submission, and he was not going to let a woman in a red dress destroy a billion-dollar payout. "Ladies and gentlemen, please calm down," Damon shouted, his voice booming through the speakers. "This is nothing more than a theatrical stunt. Even if what Ms. Vance says is true about the code, it is legally irrelevant. The statute of limitations on patent fraud expired 5 years ago. This is ancient history. You cannot sue us for something that happened when we were all using dial-up internet." He turned to me, a smug grin returning to his face. "Nice try, Sienna. You might have the truth, but I have the law. You are too late. The filing deadline has passed. We are untouchable." I looked at Elias. He did not look worried. He looked bored. He tapped his tablet. "Actually," Damon Elias said, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone, "you would be right if this was just a case of simple fraud. But the statute of limitations does not apply when there is active ongoing concealment and obstruction of justice, especially when that obstruction involves bribing federal officials." Damon's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" Elias pressed a button on his tablet. The audio system, which was still under our control, crackled to life again. But this time it was not a video of my father. It was a recording from my living room taken just yesterday. The voice was unmistakably Damon's, clear and high definition, recorded by the device I had hidden in the hydrangeas. "We scrubbed the servers right after Arthur died," Damon's voice echoed through the ballroom. "I personally shredded the original hard drives. There is no evidence left, and do not worry about the patent office audit. I paid off the clerk to bury the timestamp discrepancy. It cost 50 grand, but it was worth it to keep the file sealed forever." The recording ended. The silence in the room was absolute. Damon stood at the podium, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He had just confessed to a federal crime in front of the entire New York financial elite. I stepped closer to him. "The statute of limitations pauses when you commit a crime to hide the evidence, Damon. I believe the legal term is tolling due to fraudulent concealment. You did not just steal the company. You broke the law every single day to keep it." Suddenly, a movement in the front row caught everyone's attention. A man in a gray suit with a severe expression stood up. He did not look like an investor. He looked like the law. He held up a badge that caught the light. "I am Director Miller with the Securities and Exchange Commission." Damon gripped the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. Director Miller turned to face the room. "Based on the material evidence presented regarding the provenance of the intellectual property and the admission of fraud, we just heard I am issuing an immediate stop order. The Horizon Tech initial public offering is hereby suspended, pending a full federal investigation. Trading will not open tomorrow." The room erupted. It was chaos. Investors were shouting into their phones, lawyers were scrambling, and the flashing cameras were blinding. Grant sank to the floor, his legs giving out. But Damon just stared at me, his eyes full of hatred and shock. The gavel had fallen. The IPO was dead, and so was their freedom. Grant looked at the SEC director, and then at the furious investors closing in on the stage. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The money was gone. The reputation was gone. Prison was imminent. In that moment, the veneer of the confident CEO evaporated, leaving behind the scared little boy who used to cheat on his math homework. He did exactly what a coward does when cornered. He turned on his own pack. He scrambled back to the microphone, his hands trembling so violently he nearly dropped it. He pointed a shaking finger at Damon, who was still staring at the federal agents in shock. "It was him," Grant screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "It was all Damon. I did not know anything about the bribes or the cover-up. I am just the face of the company. Damon handles the legal side. He told me everything was clean. I am a victim here, just like the investors." He turned his desperate eyes toward me. He reached out as if to grab my hand, but I took a step back, letting his fingers grasp at empty air. "Sienna, baby. Please tell them," he pleaded, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat. "You know me. You know I would never steal. I was manipulated. Damon and my father, they used me. I am innocent. We can fix this, right? We can go home and talk about this." "I love you, Sienna." I looked down at him. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not even feel hate. I felt a profound sense of nausea. It was the feeling you get when you overturn a rock and see something slimy wriggling in the dirt. "You do not love me, Grant," I said, my voice amplified by the speakers so everyone could hear the disdain dripping from every syllable. "You love my money. You love the way I make you look successful. But right now you just look pathetic." Before Grant could respond, a blur of gold satin crashed into him. It was Whitney. She had heard her brother throw her husband under the bus, and the loyalty of the wolf pack shattered instantly. "You lying coward!" Whitney shrieked. She swung her hand, and the sound of her palm connecting with Grant's cheek echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. The impact knocked Grant sideways. He stumbled, tripping over his own feet and crashing into the podium. "How dare you blame Damon?" she screamed, standing over him like a vengeful banshee. "You knew everything. You signed the checks. You were the one who laughed about burning the hard drives. Do not you dare try to pin this on my husband, you spineless worm." Grant scrambled up, his face red where she had slapped him. He shoved Whitney back hard. "Shut up, you idiot," he yelled. "You spent the money too. You and your stupid dresses. You are all going down with me." Whitney flew at him again, claws out, tearing at his tuxedo jacket. They grappled on the stage of the Ritz-Carlton, rolling around like animals in the dirt. The crowd watched in horrified fascination. Flashbulbs popped, capturing every second of the Grant dynasty, destroying itself from the inside out. I stepped back to the edge of the stage, watching them tear each other apart. It was the ugliest thing I had ever seen, and it was absolutely beautiful. While Whitney and Grant were still screaming at each other, Elias Thorne walked calmly to the center of the stage. He did not need to shout. He simply held up a single document. The image of the paper was immediately projected onto the massive screen behind him, replacing the chaotic footage of the fight. It was the post-nuptial agreement Grant had signed just 48 hours ago. Grant stopped struggling with his sister. He looked up at the screen, his eyes widening as he recognized his own signature. "What is that?" Grant gasped, wiping blood from his lip. "That is just the lifestyle clause. It just says you get to keep the groceries." I stepped up to the microphone one last time. My voice was soft, but it carried the weight of absolute victory. "Not quite, Grant. You should have read Clause 14b. I pointed to the screen where the specific paragraph was now highlighted in red. Clause 14b states that in the event that any marital asset is proven to be derived from intellectual property originating from the spouse's direct lineage, said asset shall be immediately transferred in full to the spouse as restitution for unjust enrichment. The room went silent as the legal jargon translated into reality. Grant looked at me, his face crumbling. That means I said, cutting him off, that because you admitted the company was built on my father's code, and because you signed this document giving me everything derived from that code, you do not own Horizon Tech anymore. You do not own the stock. You do not own the building. You do not even own the suit you are wearing because you bought it with the company card. I took a step closer to him. You tried to trick me into selling my house, Grant. Instead, you signed over your entire empire. You gave me everything. And you did it with your own arrogance as the pen. Grant fell to his knees. It was not a dramatic fall for show. It was the collapse of a man who realized he had dug his own grave. He looked at his hands, the hands that had signed his life away. Damon, who was still being held by security, looked at the document on the screen. He started to laugh. It was a hysterical, broken sound. He signed it. Damon wheezed. I told him it was harmless. I told him to sign it. I looked at Damon, cold and unyielding. You were too busy looking for a payout to look for the trap, Damon. You are not the smartest person in the room. You are just the loudest. I turned my back on them, facing the audience and the cameras. Horizon Tech is under new management, I announced. And the first order of business is cleaning out the trash. Security guards moved in not to protect Grant, but to escort him off the property he no longer owned. The trap had snapped shut, the payback was complete, and it was legally binding. The heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open again, but this time it was not a guest arriving. A dozen federal agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI marched into the room, moving with military precision. They parted the sea of stunned investors like a ship breaking through ice. The gala had turned into a crime scene. Damon saw them coming. He straightened his tie, trying to summon one last shred of his courtroom persona. He stepped forward, extending a hand as if to greet a colleague attempting to use his privilege as a shield one last time. Officers, there seems to be a misunderstanding here. He began, his voice trembling slightly. I am the chief legal counsel for this corporation. We can discuss this in my office tomorrow morning. The lead agent did not shake his hand. He spun Damon around and slammed him against the edge of the stage. The sound of metal cuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the room, brighter and louder than the jazz music that had been playing just minutes ago. Damon Washington, you are under arrest for securities fraud, bribery of a federal official, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Damon's face, pressed against the stage floor, turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. The arrogance was finally choked out of him. He looked up at the investors he had tried to swindle and closed his eyes in defeat. Grant watched his brother-in-law being hauled away and turned to run. But there was nowhere to go. Two agents blocked his path, cutting off his escape route. Grant, one of them said, holding up a warrant. We have you on multiple counts of embezzlement and grand larceny. We have the digital logs of corporate funds being used for personal luxury travel and unauthorized purchases totaling over $200,000. Grant looked at me wild-eyed. That was business expenses, he stammered. The trip to Cabo. It was for networking. It was for the company. I stepped to the edge of the stage, looking down at him. Networking, I repeated coldly. Is that what you call it? Because the itemized receipt for the villa listed a guest named Amber, not a client. And I submitted that receipt to the authorities this morning along with your confession. You paid for your affair with stolen money, Grant, and now you are going to pay with your freedom. Grant's knees buckled as the agents grabbed his arms. He looked frantically around the room, searching for a lifeline. His eyes landed on a figure near the exit. Amber, he shouted, desperation clawing at his throat. Amber, call my lawyer. Tell them it is a mistake. Baby, help me. Amber stood by the champagne tower, clutching her ruined silver dress. She looked at Grant being manhandled by the police. She looked at the handcuffs. She looked at the cameras flashing. And then she made her choice. She did not step forward. She did not cry out for him. She turned her head, shielding her face with her clutch to avoid the paparazzi, and slipped into the crowd, walking briskly toward the service exit. She stepped over a fallen chair and disappeared without looking back once. She was a survivor of her own making, and she knew a sinking ship when she saw one. Grant watched her go, his mouth hanging open. The realization hit him. He had sold my father's legacy for a woman who would not even look at him when the bill came due. The agents dragged him toward the doors. He kicked and screamed, stripping away the last remnants of his dignity. I stood alone on the stage, the undisputed owner of the wreckage, watching the flashing blue lights reflect off the windows. The king and his hand were gone. The queen remained. The ballroom was clearing out, but the heavy silence of ruin hung in the air, broken only by Whitney's ragged breathing. She stood alone in the center of the dance floor, a golden statue of devastation. Her husband was in the back of a federal vehicle, and her brother was being read his rights in the lobby. She looked at the massive screen behind me where the legal transfer of ownership was still glowing in bright, unyielding letters. The reality of her situation finally pierced through her delusion. "My house!" she screamed, her voice shrill and cracking. "That is my money. You cannot take my house, Sienna. I designed that kitchen. I picked out the imported marble. It is mine. You have no right." She lunged toward me, her hands curled into claws, desperate to hurt someone, to make someone else bleed. "You thief!" she shrieked. "You dirty little thief! You planned this whole thing just to humiliate us." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply stood my ground, the red silk of my dress acting as a force field of confidence. I looked her dead in the eye, capturing the same energy she had used against me for years. "I did not plan to humiliate you, Whitney," I said, my voice calm but cutting through the air like a knife. "You did that all by yourself when you decided to spend stolen money." I took a step closer, invading her personal space. I reached out and brushed a speck of invisible dust off her shoulder, mimicking the exact condescending gesture she had used on me in my driveway just days ago. "Do you remember what you said to me in the boutique yesterday? You said I belonged in the discount aisle. You told Amber that I would stain the merchandise just by looking at it." Whitney trembled, her lower lip quivering. She tried to look away, but I would not let her. "Well, look at us now," I continued. "I am wearing the dress you said I could not afford. I am wearing the watch you called trash. And you, Whitney, you are standing there in a gown you can no longer pay for." I leaned in closer, whispering directly into her ear. "Damon's assets are frozen. The bank accounts are locked by the SEC. And the deed to your house, Damon used it as collateral for a bridge loan from the company last month. He thought the IPO would cover it." Her eyes widened in absolute terror as the realization hit her. "No. Not the house." "Yes, the house," I said. "Since I now own the company holding the note, that house belongs to me. Technically, you are trespassing on my property right now." I checked the Rolex on my wrist. It is midnight. "I am going to be generous because, unlike you, I have a conscience. You have until 8 a.m. to pack your clothes. And I mean only your clothes, Whitney. If you take one piece of furniture, one painting, or even a single silver spoon, I will have you arrested for theft, just like your husband." "You cannot do that," she sobbed, falling to her knees, clutching the hem of my dress. "Where will I go? I have nowhere." I pulled my dress from her grip, looking down at her with zero sympathy. "Try the motel 3 blocks down," I said, turning my back on her. "I hear they have a clearance rate on weeknights." I walked away, leaving her weeping on the cold marble floor. The sound of her sobbing faded as I pushed through the double doors and stepped out into the cool night air. The war was over. The federal agents hauled Grant through the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton. His tuxedo jacket was torn at the shoulder, and his bow tie hung loose around his neck like a noose. He was no longer the master of the universe. He was a frantic animal caught in a trap he had set for himself. As they pushed him toward the revolving doors, he dug his heels into the plush carpet, desperate to stop the inevitable forward motion toward the waiting squad cars. "Sienna, wait!" he screamed, his voice raw and broken. "You can stop this. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I am your husband. Doesn't that mean anything to you? We can make a deal. I will give you half. I will give you everything. Just please do not let them take me." I walked slowly behind the procession. My heels clicked rhythmically on the marble floor, a steady countdown to his destruction. I signaled to the agents. They paused just for a moment, holding Grant firmly by the arms near the exit. The flashing red and blue lights from the street outside bathed his face in a chaotic strobe of color. I stopped in front of him. I looked down at his tear-stained face, the snot running from his nose, the sheer, pathetic desperation in his eyes. It was hard to believe I had ever loved this man. It was hard to believe I had ever cried over him. I raised my left wrist, holding it up so the diamonds on the dial caught the light of the police sirens. The Rolex Daytona. The watch he had mocked. The watch he had told me to throw in the garbage. "Do you remember what you said about this watch, Grant?" I asked, my voice quiet and deadly calm amidst the chaos. "You told me it was a piece of junk. You told me it was worthless sentimentality." Grant stared at the watch, his eyes wide with fear. "I was wrong," he sobbed. "It is valuable. I know that now. It is worth millions. I will buy you 10 of them. Just tell them to let me go." I shook my head slowly, lowering my arm. "You still do not get it." "You were actually right, Grant. This watch is trash compared to the data it held inside. The metal and glass are nothing. The value was the truth hidden beneath the surface." I leaned in close so only he could hear the final verdict of our marriage. "Just like you are trash compared to the man you stole from. My father was a genius who built the future in a basement. You are just a thief in a rented suit who could not even keep his lies straight." Grant let out a wail, a sound of pure anguish as the realization crushed him. He slumped in the agent's grip, his legs giving out completely. "Get him out of here," I said, turning away. The agents dragged him through the doors and into the night. I did not watch him go. I did not need to. I already knew how his story ended. I walked back toward the empty ballroom where the music had stopped, but my life was just beginning. The wheels of justice usually turn slowly, but when you have a confession recorded on a federal wiretap and the Securities and Exchange Commission breathing down your neck, they spin fast enough to take your head off. The months following the gala were a blur of depositions, court filings, and the satisfying sound of gavels sealing the fate of the men who tried to destroy me. Damon was the first to fall. The New York State Bar Association does not look kindly on lawyers who bribe officials and fabricate evidence. I sat in the back of the hearing room, wearing a simple black dress, watching as the ethics committee stripped him of the one thing he valued more than money: his license to practice law. It was a clinical execution of a career. The chairman read the verdict in a monotone voice: permanent disbarment. Damon stood there, his expensive suit hanging loosely on a frame that had lost 20 pounds from stress. He was no longer the shark who terrorized me in my living room. He was a man with a useless degree and a name that was now radioactive in every law firm in the country. He did not look at me as he left the chamber. He knew that if he did, he would only see his own failure reflected in my eyes. Grant's trial was a public spectacle. The media devoured the story of the tech mogul who stole his empire from a dying man. He tried to plead ignorance. He tried to blame Damon. He even tried to blame me, claiming I had entrapped him. But the jury did not buy the act. They saw the receipts from Cabo. They heard the recordings. They saw the timestamps on the blockchain. The sentencing hearing was brief. Grant stood before the judge, his hands clasped in front of him, trembling. He looked small. The judge looked over his spectacles and delivered the number that would define the next decade of Grant's life: 10 years in federal custody. Minimum security was denied due to flight risk. Grant turned to look at the gallery as the bailiff clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists. He scanned the faces, looking for me. I was there, sitting in the front row. I did not smile. I did not wave. I simply watched him being led away through the side door. The door closed with a heavy final thud. It was the sound of a book closing on a very long and painful chapter. The final victory, however, was not in the courtroom. It was on the side of the glass skyscraper downtown. I stood on the sidewalk looking up at the 50-story building. A massive crane was parked on the street, blocking traffic. Workmen in orange vests were torching the bolts that held the massive silver letters of Horizon Tech in place. One by one, the letters were lowered to the ground. The H swung in the wind, looking like a broken bone. In their place, a new sign was being hoisted up. It was simple, elegant, and made of unpolished steel, just like the servers my father built in our basement. Vance Dynamics. I watched as the V was bolted into place. The legacy was restored. The stolen code was home. The lie was erased, and the truth was now written in steel across the skyline for the whole city to see. My father was no longer the ghost in the machine. He was the name on the building, and I was the CEO who put it there. The house was undergoing an exorcism. I stood in the center of the foyer holding a clipboard watching a team of movers in blue coveralls dismantle the life Grant had imposed on this space. They were not just moving furniture. They were removing a parasite. "Take the leather sofa," I said, pointing to the monstrosity in the living room, and the glass coffee table, and the humidor on the mantel. "In fact, if it looks like it belongs in a bachelor pad or a corporate lobby, put it in the truck." The foreman wiped his forehead. "What about the electronics, ma'am? The 80-inch television, the surround sound system?" "Donate it," I said without looking up. "Or trash it. I do not care. Just get it out of my sight." One by one, the symbols of Grant's ego were carried out the front door. The golf clubs he never used, but displayed to look wealthy. The autographed jerseys of players he did not know. The massive oil painting of himself he had commissioned for his 40th birthday, which hung over the fireplace like a dictator watching his subjects. As the items left the house seemed to physically expand. The air became lighter. The shadows retreated. The Victorian bones of the building which I had spent years restoring began to breathe again. I was stripping away the veneer of modern coldness he had forced upon us to reveal the warm, beating heart of the home underneath. Once the living room was empty, I walked to the basement. This was where Grant had banished the things he considered useless. For years he had told me my art was clutter. He said it clashed with the aesthetic of a tech CEO's home. He had forced me to take down my work and hide it away in the dark. I pulled the chain on the single light bulb. The basement smelled of damp concrete and neglect. In the corner, buried under a pile of Grant's old fitness equipment, I found them. I pulled back a dusty tarp. There they were. My canvases. I ran my hand over the textured surface of a landscape I had painted the year before we got married. It was vibrant and messy and full of life. It was everything Grant hated. And it was everything I was. I picked up the largest canvas. It was heavy, but I did not ask for help. I carried it up the narrow stairs myself, my muscles straining, my breath coming in short bursts. I walked into the living room past the confused movers and set it down against the wall where the television used to be. I went back down. I brought up another, and another. For the next hour, I ignored the movers. I was on a mission of reclamation. I found a hammer and nails. I climbed the ladder. I took down the hooks that had held Grant's sterile art, and I drove new nails into the plaster. I hung my chaotic blue seascape over the fireplace. I put my abstract field of sunflowers in the hallway. I filled the dining room with the portraits of strangers I had sketched in the park. When I stepped back to look at the room, the transformation was complete. The gray and black prison Grant had built was gone. The room was alive with color. It was imperfect. It was loud. It was mine. The foreman walked up to me holding a final invoice. "That is the last of it, ma'am. The truck is full. Where do you want us to take his personal effects?" I looked at the truck filled with the remnants of a man who thought he owned the world. "Take it to the dump," I said, signing the paper. "Or leave it on the curb. He won't be needing it where he is going." I closed the heavy front door and locked it. For the first time in 10 years, the silence in the house did not feel lonely. It felt like peace. The bell above the door of the pawn shop chimed with a familiar rusty persistence. It was the same sound that had greeted me weeks ago when I walked in here, a desperate woman clutching a watch I thought was worthless. But today, the air inside did not smell like desperation. It smelled of old paper oil and victory. Mr. Russo was sitting at his workbench, his magnifying loupe pressed to his eye, tinkering with the escapement of a vintage pocket watch. He looked up as I approached the counter. His face broke into a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You look different, Sienna," he said, setting down his tweezers. "You look like someone who just won a war." I smiled, placing a heavy leather portfolio on the scratched glass counter. "I did not just win, Mr. Russo. I conquered. And I could not have done it without my general." He looked at the portfolio confused. He wiped his hands on a rag and opened it. Inside was a cashier's check. The amount was enough to buy his building 3 times over. His eyes widened behind his glasses. He looked from the check to me, his mouth slightly open. "Sienna." I cannot take this. This is too much. I only did what was right. Your father was my friend. I reached across the counter and covered his hand with mine. This is not a gift, Mr. Russo. It is an investment. I do not want you to run a pawn shop anymore. I do not want you to deal with desperate people selling their memories to pay the rent. I gestured around the room at the dusty shelves filled with forgotten treasures. I want you to turn this place into a museum, the Russo Gallery of Horology, a place where people come to appreciate the history of time, not to sell it. You are the only one who knows the stories behind these gears. I want you to tell them. He looked around the shop, seeing it not for what it was, but for what it could be. Tears welled up in his eyes. He nodded slowly, unable to speak. He simply squeezed my hand. I reached into my purse and pulled out the Rolex Daytona. The steel was scratched and the dial was faded, but as I laid it on the velvet tray between us, it shone brighter than any diamond in the city. Mr. Russo went to the back and returned with a porcelain teapot and 2 cups. He poured the tea, the steam rising in the quiet shop mingling with the dust motes, dancing in the afternoon sun. We sat there in silence sipping the hot tea, just looking at the watch. For 30 years it sat in a drawer, I said softly. Everyone thought it was broken. Grant thought it was trash. Even I thought it was just a keepsake. But it was working the whole time. It was waiting. Mr. Russo picked it up, handling it with the reverence of a priest holding a relic. It is a funny thing about watches, Sienna, he said, his voice raspy with emotion. People think they just measure hours and minutes. But the good ones, the real ones, they measure lives. This watch saw your father's genius. It saw his betrayal. It saw your struggle. And finally, it saw your justice. He placed it back on the tray. It is not just a machine, he whispered. It is a witness. I nodded, running my finger over the cold metal of the bezel. It was the only witness that mattered. It was the silent partner that had brought down an empire. Keep it safe for me, I said. It belongs in the exhibit. Center stage. Mr. Russo smiled, wiping a tear from his cheek. I will polish it up. It will look brand new. No, I said firm. Leave the scratches. Leave every dent and every scuff. They are part of the story. They prove it survived. We finished our tea surrounded by the ticking of 1,000 clocks, but for the first time in my life, I was not worried about running out of time. I had all the time in the world, and I intended to enjoy every second of it. The boardroom on the 50th floor had changed. The cold, sterile glass walls that Grant loved were gone, replaced by warm wood and open shelving filled with prototypes. The air no longer smelled of fear and stale scotch. It smelled of fresh coffee and possibility. I sat at the head of the table. 6 months ago, I was the wife who was not allowed to speak in this room. Now I was the chairwoman of the board. Mr. Sterling, a remnant of the old regime, cleared his throat. He was a man who measured success only in quarterly aggressive growth, and he was losing patience with my management style. Ms. Vance, while we appreciate the boost in employee morale, the numbers are concerning, Sterling said, tapping his pen on the mahogany table. You increased the R&D budget by 40%. You expanded the employee healthcare plan. You are running this company like a charity, not a tech giant. The shareholders are asking where the killer instinct is. They are asking if you have the stomach for this industry. He paused, looking around the table for support. A few other older men nodded. They missed the days of Grant's ruthless cost-cutting. They missed the artificial stock pumps. I did not get angry. I did not raise my voice. I simply took a sip of water and looked Sterling in the eye. You mistake overhead for waste. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice calm and authoritative. Grant stripped this company to the bone to show a short-term profit. He starved the very thing that made us valuable. Innovation. I stood up and walked to the wall of windows. You want a killer instinct. You want a product that dominates the market. Fine. I turned back to them and pressed a button on the console. The smart glass of the table flickered to life. A 3-dimensional schematic rotated in the center of the room. It was complex, intricate, and unlike anything currently on the market. My father did not just leave behind the compression algorithm, I said, pointing to the display. He left a notebook filled with what came next. He called it the Echo interface. The shareholders leaned in. Current cloud computing has a latency issue, I explained. It is a bottleneck that slows down everything from financial trading to medical imaging. Grant ignored this problem because solving it required patience. He wanted quick wins. I swiped my hand across the air, expanding the hologram. My team and I spent the last 6 months building this. It is a decentralized processing node based on my father's original architecture. It eliminates server lag entirely. We tested it yesterday. It is 300 times faster than our nearest competitor. The room went silent. Sterling's mouth hung slightly open. He looked at the data scrolling on the screen. He knew what he was seeing. It was not just a product. It was a monopoly. This is proprietary, Sterling asked, his voice hushed. Patented as of this morning, I replied. And the beta launch is scheduled for next week. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. So, Mr. Sterling, you were asking about my stomach for this industry. I do not need to be a shark to win. I just need to be smarter than everyone else. And with this technology, Vance Dynamics is not just competing. We are making the competition obsolete. Sterling closed his folder. He looked at me with a newfound respect, bordering on fear. I withdraw my concerns, Chairwoman. I smiled. It was the smile of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Good, I said, sitting back down. Now let us talk about the employee profit-sharing program, because if they build the future, they deserve a piece of it. The meeting continued, but the doubt was gone. I had not just silenced the critics, I had turned them into believers. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the city streets into a blur of gray and neon. I sat in the driver's seat of my new Aston Martin, the leather warm and smelling of success. The engine purred a low rumble that vibrated through the chassis. I was on my way home from the office, a place where I now commanded respect, not coffee runs. The traffic light at the intersection of 4th and Elm turned red. I eased the car to a stop. The windshield wipers swished rhythmically back and forth, a metronome for the quiet jazz playing on the stereo. To my right was a discount grocery store, the kind with fluorescent lights that buzzed and linoleum floors that were never quite clean. I looked through the rain-streaked window. The automatic doors slid open and a woman walked out, pushing a line of carts. She was wearing a shapeless lime green vest over a stained white polo shirt. Her hair, which used to be a golden halo of salon perfection, was pulled back into a messy, frizzy ponytail. Her roots were showing dark and uncared for against the bleached ends. She struggled with the carts, shoving them into the corral. A customer bumped into her, a large man carrying a case of soda. He didn't apologize. He shouted something at her, pointing a finger in her face. I watched her reaction. The old Whitney, the one who had screamed at me in the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, would have clawed his eyes out. She would have fired him from a job he didn't even have. But this woman just shrank. She kept her head down. She mumbled an apology. She looked defeated. It was Whitney. The realization washed over me, not with a wave of satisfaction, but with a strange stillness. Here was the woman who had made my life a living hell. The woman who had treated me like a servant in my own home. The woman who had conspired to steal my father's legacy. And now she was wrangling shopping carts in the rain for minimum wage. My hand hovered over the button to lower the window. A dark part of me, the part that still remembered the sting of her insults, wanted to do it. I wanted to roll down the glass. I wanted to rev the engine. I wanted her to look up and see me. I wanted her to see the car. I wanted her to see the Rolex on my wrist. I wanted to see the recognition in her eyes and watch her crumble with envy. I watched her wipe rain from her face with a rough hand. She looked miserable. She looked cold. She looked like she had lost everything because she had. But then I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I saw a woman who was whole. A woman who was building a future. A woman who had already won. Engaging with her, even to gloat, would be acknowledging that she still mattered. It would mean she still had power over my emotions. It would mean I was still playing her game just from a winning position. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. I was playing a different sport entirely. The traffic light turned green. I moved my hand away from the window button. I did not honk. I did not look back. I simply lifted my foot off the brake and pressed the accelerator. The car surged forward smooth and powerful, leaving the grocery store behind in the mist. Whitney continued to stack carts, unaware that the architect of her destruction had just passed her by. I drove into the night, leaving her exactly where she belonged. In the rearview mirror. In the past. In the rain. The Aston Martin glided through the city like a shark moving through deep waters, silent and dangerous. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the neon lights of the skyscrapers above. I drove with one hand on the wheel, the leather cool under my palm. My other hand rested on my lap, the Rolex Daytona heavy and reassuring against my skin. I glanced down at the watch. In the passing streetlights, the scratches on the steel bezel caught the light. To anyone else, it looked like damaged goods. A collector would say it was imperfect. A pawnbroker would deduct value for every nick and scuff. Grant had called it trash. He saw the wear and tear and assumed it was broken. He saw the age and assumed it was obsolete. That was his fatal flaw. That was the flaw of everyone in his circle. They confused condition with character. They confused price with value. I thought about Whitney shivering in her lime green vest. I thought about Grant sitting in his cell, probably still believing he was better than the other inmates, because his suit used to be Armani. They were people who lived entirely on the surface. They spent their lives polishing the exterior, terrified that if anyone looked too closely, they would see the rot underneath. They were like the gilded frames Grant used to buy for his office. Ornate, heavy, expensive, but surrounding a blank canvas. My father was the opposite. He wore cardigans with holes in the elbows. He forgot to shave. He drove a car that rattled when it went over 40 miles an hour. But inside his mind was a cathedral. He held the architecture of the future in his head. He was a diamond covered in coal dust. And me. They looked at me and saw a wife. They saw a housekeeper. They saw a woman who liked to paint pretty pictures and keep her mouth shut. They thought I was the frame existing only to make Grant look like a masterpiece. They never realized I was the artist. Real value does not need to shout. It does not need a press conference or an IPO launch party. It sits quietly in the dark waiting. It endures the scratches and the dents because it knows the mechanism inside is bulletproof. I rubbed my thumb over the crystal face of the watch. It was not just a timekeeper. It was a lesson. It taught me that the things that look the most broken are often the ones that have survived the hardest hits. It taught me that while chrome peels and gold plating flakes away, solid steel just gets tougher. I turned the car onto the highway, the engine roaring to life as I accelerated. I was done looking in the rearview mirror. I was done polishing coal, hoping it would shine. I knew my worth now, and it had nothing to do with the balance in my bank account. It came from the knowledge that when the pressure was applied, I did not crack. I crystallized. The road ahead was wide open, and for the first time in my life, I was the one driving. No passengers, no map, just me and the time I had earned. And that was the most valuable thing of all. The wind at the top of the Vance Dynamics Tower did not howl. It hummed a low-frequency vibration that resonated with the steel skeleton of the building beneath my feet. I stood at the edge of the glass parapet looking down at the city grid. From 50 stories up, New York looked less like a chaotic metropolis and more like a perfectly organized circuit board. The cars were pulses of data moving through the arteries of the streets. The lights were nodes of energy. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the thin, cold air. It was the cleanest breath I had taken in 10 years. I turned away from the view and walked back into the executive suite. The room was dark, lit only by the ambient glow of the city outside. In the center of the room, on a pedestal of black marble, sat a small glass cube. It was illuminated by a single pinpoint spotlight. This was not a safe, it was an altar. I raised my left wrist. The Rolex Daytona caught the beam of light one last time. The scratches on the bezel, the tiny dent near the crown, the faded tachymeter scale, they were all illuminated in high definition. For months, this watch had been a weapon. It had been a shield. It had been the only proof that I was not crazy, that my family's legacy was real. It had ticked through the insults. It had ticked through the theft. It had ticked through the moment I destroyed the man who tried to erase us. But weapons are for war. And the war was over. I reached for the clasp. The metal felt warm against my pulse, a living thing that had shared my heartbeat during the darkest nights of my life. I pressed the release mechanism. Click. The sound was sharp and final in the quiet room. The bracelet opened. I slid the watch off my wrist. My skin felt suddenly light, naked, and free. I held it in my palm for a moment, feeling its weight. It was heavy with history. It was heavy with the ghost of a man who worked in a basement and dreamed of a better world. It was heavy with the memory of a daughter who had to break herself to become strong enough to carry it. I stepped forward and placed the watch onto the black velvet cushion inside the glass cube. I arranged it carefully, the dial facing upward, the hands sweeping relentlessly forward. It looked peaceful there. It looked like an artifact from a bygone era, a relic of a battle that was now just a story to be told. I lowered the glass cover. It sealed with a soft hiss of air, locking the past away. I rested my fingertips on the cool glass, staring at the face of the watch. I saw my own reflection superimposed over the dial. I did not see the scared wife. I did not see the victim. I saw the CEO. I saw the daughter. I saw the future. I smiled, a small private smile that was just for him. Thank you, Dad. Lesson learned. The light in the display case flickered once and then slowly faded. The room plunged into darkness, leaving only the silhouette of a woman standing tall against the glow of the city she now owned. The ticking stopped. The silence was perfect. The most profound lesson from Sienna Vance's journey is that we must never confuse silence with weakness, nor appearance with value. Throughout the narrative, the antagonists underestimated Sienna because she did not fit their superficial definition of power. They saw a quiet wife and a battered watch, dismissing both as worthless trash. They failed to realize that the most dangerous forces are often the ones that move quietly in the dark. Grant and Damon lived their lives chasing the veneer of success. They polished the exterior, bought the expensive suits, and built a glass tower, believing that looking the part was enough to rule the world. They represent the fragility of ego. In contrast, Sienna and the Rolex Daytona represent the resilience of substance. The watch was scratched, dented, and ignored, yet it held the undeniable truth that brought down an empire. It teaches us that scars are not signs of brokenness. They are proof of survival. Furthermore, the story illustrates that integrity is the ultimate long game. Theft and manipulation might provide a temporary shortcut to the top, but a foundation built on lies will inevitably collapse under its own weight. Sienna did not need to scream to be heard. She simply needed to wait, gather her resources, and let the truth speak for itself. True worth does not need to shout to be valuable. It endures the pressure, it survives the neglect, and when the time is right, it shines brighter than any diamond. Never let anyone convince you that you are trash just because they lack the vision to see your treasure. If you are ready to stop being underestimated and start claiming your true worth, hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories where the underdog takes the crown.